I recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. McCormick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. War is a horrible thing, and dealing with humanitarian aid during the fog of war and the stresses that go with that, I admire your efforts in that regard. I know that's a difficult thing, especially in a politically charged environment, to add to that. With that said, some interesting things came up that I kind of want to clarify with some statements you've made in the past. The Washington Post reported that in January of this year, while you were giving a speech on climate change, a former employee of USAID interrupted you regarding the current conflict of Israel, saying, "You wrote a book on genocide, you were still working for the administration, you should resign and speak out," end quote. Mr. Chairman, I ask unanimous consent to insert this Washington Post article titled USAID's Samantha Power, genocide scholars confronted by staff on Gaza to the record, please.
Without objection.
Thank you. According to the same article, you thanked her for her comments and stated that more than 25,000 civilians have been killed in the conflict. That number came from the Gaza Ministry of Health, which Hamas controls. Did you agree with the heckler's premise that Israel's fight against Hamas constitutes genocide? Yes or no?
I think every country has a right to defend itself, and Israel certainly has a right to defend itself. Hamas still seeks to eliminate Israelis. I just visited Kibbutz Be'eri, where more than 100 people were killed on October 7th. So I think that right to pursue Hamas is clear. I also think pursuing Hamas in a manner that looks out for civilians, where they provide humanitarian access in sufficient amounts, is imperative as well.
So do you believe, I'm going to restate the question just to make sure I understand, do you believe the way that Israel's fighting against Hamas, does that constitute genocide, yes or no?
Again, I'm not going to answer yes or no questions like that. I'm going to do my job, which is focusing on getting humanitarian assistance to people who need it.
Fair enough. Obviously, the person who confronted you is not the only USAID employee who thinks this way. In November, hundreds of your employees signed a letter calling for a ceasefire. And I was in Afghanistan. I realized the USMC, which governs military actions, a little bit different than everybody else. But for example, I couldn't, as a military non-combatant, an ER physician in Afghanistan, it'd probably be inappropriate for me to write a letter to the president saying, I think we should have a ceasefire in Afghanistan, to say the least. Do you think it's appropriate for USAID workers to do this same kind of thing, where they basically sign letters stating an opinion rather than doing their job, basically taking a political stance?
I mean, I have no evidence that they're not doing their jobs. As you noted,
so it is appropriate.
75 crises. Not whether it's, we have a dissent channel, we have a direct channel for a reason. I benefit from hearing from staff. I get criticized all the time. Sometimes I think the criticisms are valid, and sometimes I learn something about how what I'm doing is perceived, or how what the Biden administration is doing is perceived. And I would note that, again, we've had internal traffic, maybe not of that magnitude, but also on Afghanistan.
I got to move quickly because I only have a minute and a half left, so I appreciate your candor on that. There's an article last month titled "Top Biden Advisor Reveals She Confronted Netanyahu," and then quoted you as their healthcare summit, where you said that you asked Prime Minister Netanyahu to improve compliance with international humanitarian law. Mr. Chairman, I asked unanimous consent to insert this Washington Post article titled "Top Biden Advisor Reveals She Confronted Netanyahu" into the record.
Without objection.
Okay. Could you please give us specific instances of violations of international humanitarian law on Israel's part?
First of all, I did not say that I confronted, but I had on my trip really important, extensive discussions about the need to improve deconfliction.
Do you have any violation of international humanitarian law by Israel?
No. Can I just finish the
I got it quick.
point,
I got 38 seconds.
I understand, but you've asked a question. Civilians and humanitarians are dying in very, very large numbers, including most recently the World Central Kitchen strike.
So is Israel violating international law?
To improve the ability to keep civilians safe and to allow humanitarians to do their job, as the World Central Kitchen strike.
Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and I got to finish up because I'm running out of time here real quickly. The White House National Security Communication Advisor John Kirby said that the State Department had not found any incidences where Israel has violated international humanitarian law. who's wrong and who's right here. There's conflicting articles based on two officials of the Biden administration who seem to think that either Israel is conducting an unjust war or they're not in violation. I'm just kind of confused, and I think maybe if we're going to make political statements, whether it be by your employees or yourself, it starts to confound the problem of getting your job done. And I think your job is very important, don't get me wrong. I think what you're doing is incredibly important, and we need to take care of innocent non-combatants that are being starved, if you will, or not getting the service they need to. But I just want to make sure we have a unified process going forward rather than contradictory statements by political people that don't seem to have their act together when it comes to unifying response. Thank you. With that, I have to yield.
I recognize the